12. When Levin first returned from Moscow, and while he still started and blushed every time he remembered the disgrace of the refusal, he had said to himself, "I blushed and started like this when I was ploughed in physics and had to remain in the second class. And in the same way I felt myself lost when I made a mess of my sister's affair that had been entrusted to me. And what happened? Now that years have passed, when I remember it, I am surprised that it could have grieved me so much. So it will be with this grief. Time will pass, and I shall become indifferent." But 3 months had passed, and he had not become indifferent to it, and to think of it still hurt him as it had done in the first days. He could not find peace, because he had so long dreamed of family life, and felt so ripe for it, but was still unmarried and further than ever from marriage. He himself felt painfully what all those around him felt too, that it is not good for a man of his age to be alone. He remembered how, just before leaving for Moscow, he had said to Nicholas, his cowman, a naive peasant with whom he liked to talk, "Well, Nicholas, I want to get married." And how Nicholas had promptly replied, as on a matter about which there could be no doubt, "And it's high time, Constantine Dmitrievich." But now he was further from marriage than ever. The place was unoccupied, and when in imagination he tried to put one of the girls he knew there, he felt that it was quite impossible. Moreover, the memory of her refusal, and the part he had played in it, tormented him with shame. However much he told himself that he was not at all to blame in that matter, the memory of it, together with other shameful memories, made him start and blush. There had been in his past, as in that of every man, actions which he realized were bad, and for which his conscience ought to have tormented him. But the recollections of those bad actions did not torment him nearly as much as these trivial yet shameful memories. These wounds never closed up. And among these recollections stood the memory of her refusal, and the pitiful role he must have played in the eyes of the others that evening. But time and work told. The painful memories became more and more covered over by the commonplace but important events of country life. Every week he thought less and less about Kitty. He waited impatiently to hear that she was married or was getting married soon, hoping that such news, like the drawing of an aching tooth, would quite cure him. Meanwhile, spring had come, a glorious, steady spring, without the expectations and disappointments spring usually brings. It was one of these rare springs which plants, animals, and men alike rejoice in. This lovely spring roused Levin still more, and confirmed him in the determination completely to renounce the past, in order to fashion his solitary life firmly and independently. Though he had not carried out many of the plans with which he had returned to the country from Moscow, he had held to the most important one, that of living a pure life, and he was not experiencing the shame which used to torment him when he had fallen, but was able to look people boldly in the face. Already in February, he had received a letter from Mary Nikolaevna to say that his brother Nicholas's health was getting worse, but that he would not submit to any treatment. In consequence of this news, Levin went to Moscow, saw his brother, and managed to persuade him to consult a doctor and go to a watering place abroad. He was so successful in persuading his brother and in lending him money for the journey, without irritating him, that he was satisfied with himself in this respect. Besides his agricultural pursuits, which required special attention in spring, and besides reading, Levin had another occupation. He had that winter begun writing a book on agriculture, the basis of which was that the character of the labourer was treated as a definite factor, like climate and soil, and that therefore the conclusions of agricultural science should be deduced not from data supplied by climate and soil only, but from data of climate, soil, and the immutable character of the labourer. So that in spite of his solitary life, or rather because of it, his time was completely filled up. Only occasionally he felt an unsatisfied desire to share with someone besides Agatha Mikhailovna the thoughts that wandered through his brain. For even with her he often discussed physics, agricultural theories, and especially philosophy, which last was her favourite subject. The spring had set in late. During the last weeks of Lent, the weather had been clear and frosty. It thawed in the sunshine by day, but at night the thermometer went down to 16 degrees Fahrenheit. The snow was covered with a crust of ice so thick that carts could pass even where there were no roads. Easter found snow still on the ground, but on Easter Monday, a warm wind began to blow. The clouds gathered, and for 3 days and nights warm, stormy rain poured down. On the Thursday, the wind fell and a thick grey mist rose, as if to hide the secret of the changes nature was carrying on. Beneath the mist, the snow waters rushed down, the ice on the river cracked and moved, and the turbid, foaming torrents flowed quicker, till on the first Sunday after Easter, towards evening, the mists dissolved, the clouds broke into fleecy cloudlets and dispersed. The sky cleared, and real spring was there. In the morning, the bright rising sun quickly melted the thin ice on the water, and the warm air, all around, vibrated with the vapour given off by the awakening earth. Last year's grass grew green again, and new blades came up like needle points. Buds swelled on the guelder and currant bushes, and on the sticky, spicy birch trees. And among the golden catkins and on the willow branches, the bees began to hum. The unseen larks burst into song above the velvety fresh green and the frozen stubble. The peewits began to cry above the water brought down by the storm, and still flooding the low-lying places and marshes. And high up, the cranes and geese flew, uttering their spring call. The cattle, who had lost all but a few patches of their winter coats, began to low in the meadows. The crooked-legged lambs began to play around their bleating mothers, who were losing their wool. Swift-footed children began to run along the quickly drying paths, marked with imprints of bare feet. The merry voices of women who were bleaching their linen began to chatter by the ponds, and the axes of peasants, getting ready their wooden ploughs and harrows, clicked in the yards. The real spring had come. 13. Levin put on his high boots, and for the first time, a cloth coat instead of a fur, and went out to attend to his farm. Stepping now on a piece of ice, now into the sticky mud, he crossed a stream of dazzling water. Spring is a time for making plans and resolutions, and Levin, like a tree which in the springtime does not yet know in which direction and what manner its young shoots and twigs, still imprisoned in their buds, will develop, did not quite know what work on his beloved land he was going to take in hand. But he felt that his mind was full of the finest plans and resolutions. First of all, he went to the cattle yard. The cows had been let out there, and, warmed by the sunshine, their glossy new coats glistening, they were longing to be let out into the fields. After he had for a while admired his cows, all familiar to him to the minutest detail, Levin gave orders for them to be driven into the field and for the calves to be let out into the yard. The cowherd ran away merrily to get ready. The dairymaids, with twigs in their hands, holding their skirts up over their bare white legs, not yet sunburned, splashed through the puddles into the yard, driving the calves, who were mad with the joy of spring. Having gazed with admiration at the exceptionally fine calves born that year, the older ones were as big as peasants' cows, and Pavel's 3-month-old calf was as big as a yearling. Levin gave orders to bring a trough of food for them, and to put some hay into the racks outside. But it turned out that the racks, which had been put up in the yard and not used during winter, were broken. He sent for the carpenter, who was on the contract to be with the threshing machine. But it turned out that he was mending the harrows, which should have been mended the week before Lent. This was very annoying to Levin. It was vexing that the careless farm management, against which he had struggled so many years with all his might, still continued. He found out that the racks which were not wanted in winter had been taken into the farm horse's stable, and there it got broken, as they were lightly made, being meant only for the calves. Besides this, it proved that the harrows and all the agricultural implements which he had ordered to be examined and mended in winter, for which purpose 3 carpenters are specially engaged, had not been seen to, and the harrows were now being mended when it was time to start harrowing. Levin sent for the steward, but instead of waiting, went at once to look for him himself. The steward, in his astragan-trimmed coat, as radiant as everything else that day, was coming from the threshing ground, breaking a bit of straw in his hands. "Why is the carpenter not with the threshing machine?" "Oh, I meant to tell you yesterday that the harrows need mending. It's time to plough, you know." "Why wasn't it done in winter?" "But what do you want with the carpenter? Where are the racks from the calves' yard? I've given orders for them to be put into their places. What does one to do with such people?" said the steward, waving his arm. "It's not a case of such people, but of such a steward," said Levin, flaring up. "Tell me what I keep you for," he shouted, but remembering that this would not help matters, he stopped in the middle of what he was saying and only sighed. "Well, can we begin sowing?" he asked after a pause. "It will be possible, beyond Turkino, tomorrow or the day after." "And the clover?" "I've sent Vasily. He and Mishka are sowing. Only I don't know if they will get through. It's very sticky." "How many acres?" 16. "Why not the lot?" shouted Levin. That they were only sowing 16 instead of 50 acres with clover was still more annoying. To grow clover successfully, it was necessary, according to both theory and his own experience, to sow it as early as possible, almost before the snow had finished melting, and Levin could never get this done. "There's no one to do it. What are you to do with such people? 3 have not come, and now Simon. Well then, you should have let the straw wait." "So I have. But where are the men?" 5 are making compote," he meant compost, "and 4 are turning the oats over. They might begin sprouting, Constantine Dmitrich." Levin understood very well that "might begin sprouting" meant that the English seed oats were already spoiling. Here again his orders had not been obeyed. "Ah dear, didn't I speak about it long ago in Lent?" "Don't worry, it will all be done in good time." Levin waved his hand angrily and went to the barn to look at the oats. Then he came back to the stable. The oats were not yet spoiled, but the men were turning them over with shovels, whereas he should have let them run down from the loft. Levin ordered him to do this, told off 2 of the men to help sow the clover, and got over his vexation with the foreman. Indeed, the day was so beautiful, one could not long remain angry. "Ignat," he called to the coachman, who with sleeves rolled up was washing a carriage at the pump. "Saddle me." "Which, sir?" "Kolpik." "Yes, sir." While the horse was being saddled, Levin again called the steward, who was hanging about within sight, in order to make it out with him, and began to talk about the spring work that lay before them and his plans for the estate. Carting manure must be started early so that it should be over before the first hay harvest, and the far field will have to be ploughed continually so as to keep the earth clean. We must hire labour for the hay harvest and not pay in kind. The foreman listened attentively and evidently tried to approve of his master's plans, but his face still wore that hopeless and despondent expression so familiar to Levin. This expression seemed to say, "That's all very well, but it will be as God wills." Nothing grieved Levin so much as this manner, but it was a manner common to all the numerous stewards he had employed. They all took up the same attitude toward his plans, and therefore he now no longer grew angry with them, but he was grieved, feeling all the more stimulated to resist this, so to say, elemental force for which he could find no other name but "as God wills," which always obstructed him. "We'll see if we can manage it," said the steward. "Why should you not manage it?" "We must have at least 50 more labourers. But you see, they don't come. Some came today, but they wanted 70 rubles each for the summer." Levin was silent. That force was opposing him again. He knew that, try as they would, they had never managed to get more than from 37 to 40 labourers at the proper price. 40 could be hired, but never more than 40. Yet all the same he could not but continue the struggle. "Send to Sura and the Chefirovka if they don't come. We must try and find men." "I'll send right enough," said Vasily Fedorich, the steward, despondently. "But the horses too are getting weak." "We will buy some more." "But don't I know," he added laughing, "that you always want less of everything and worse. However, this year I will not let you have your way. I'll see to everything myself." "You don't sleep much as it is, I think. It's always pleasanter for us when the master's eye is on us." "Then it's down in the birch valley that they are sowing the clover." "I'll ride over and see," said Levin, mounting the little light bay horse, which the coachman had brought. "You won't be able to cross the brook, Constantine Dmitrich," the coachman called out. "Well then, I'll go through the forest." And Levin rode across the muddy yard and out of the gate into the field at a brisk amble, his fresh little horse snorting at the puddles and pulling at the bridle. If he had felt light-hearted in the cattle and farmyards, he felt still more so in the fields. Gently swayed by the ambling pace of his good little horse, and drinking in the warm smell with the freshness of snow and air in it, he rode through the forest over the crumbling, sinking snow that melted at each footstep, and rejoiced at the sight of each one of his trees with its swelling buds and the moss reviving on its bark. When he had passed the forest, a vast expanse of velvety green unrolled before him without a single bare spot, and only sprinkled here and there in the hollows with patches of unmelted snow. He was not irritated either by the sight of a peasant's horse and colt treading down the young growth. He told a peasant he met to drive them off, nor by the jeering and stupid answer the peasant Ipot, whom he happened to meet, gave him in reply to his question. "Well, Ipot, will it soon be time to sow?" "We must plough first, Constantine Dmitrich," said Ipot. The further he went, the happier he felt, and all sorts of plans for his estate, each better than the last, presented themselves to him. To plant rows of willows with a southern aspect in all the fields, so that the snow should not remain long under them. To divide the fields, tilling 6 and keeping 3 under grass. To build a new cattle yard at the further end of the field, to dig a pond and to make folds for the cattle for manuring purposes. Then he would have 300 desiatinas of wheat, 100 of potatoes, and 150 of clover, and not a single desiatina exhausted. Dreaming such dreams, carefully guiding his horse so as not to trample down his young growth, he rode up to the labourers who were sowing the clover. The cart with the seed was standing not on the border, but in a field of winter wheat, which was being cut up by the wheels and trampled by the horse's feet. Both the labourers were sitting on the narrow path between the fields, probably sharing a pipe of tobacco. The earth in the cart, with which the seeds were mixed, was not rubbed fine, but was pressed or frozen into lumps. On seeing the master, the labourer Vasily moved toward the cart, and Mishka began to sow. This was not right, but Levin seldom got angry with the hired man. When Vasily came up, Levin told him to take the cart and horse onto the border. "It won't matter, sir. The wheat will recover." "Please don't argue," said Levin, "but do as you're told." "Yes, sir," answered Vasily, and took hold of the horse's head. "But the sowing, Constantine Dmitrich, is getting on first rate," he said, making up to the master. "Only the walking is dreadful. You drag half a hundredweight under your boots." "And why has not the earth been sifted?" said Levin. "Oh, but we crumple it up," said Vasily, taking a handful and rubbing the earth between his palms. Vasily was not to blame that they had given him unsifted earth, but still it was annoying. Having more than once successfully tested a patent remedy for conquering vexation, and making all that seemed wrong right again, Levin employed it now. He looked at the strides Mishka took dragging the enormous lumps of earth that stuck to his feet, dismounted, took the seed basket from Vasily, and prepared to sow. "Where did you stop?" Vasily pointed to a mark with his foot, and Levin began scattering the seeds and earth as best he could. It was hard walking, and having done a row, Levin, wet with perspiration, stopped and gave back the basket. "Mind, sir, and don't scold me for this row when summer comes," said Vasily. "Why?" said Levin merrily, feeling that his remedy was acting well. "Oh, you'll see when the summer comes. You'll distinguish it. You just look where I sowed last spring, how regularly I scattered it over. Why, Constantine Dmitrich, I don't think I could try harder if I was working for my own father. I don't like to do things badly myself, and I see that others don't. What's good for the master is good for us too. When one looks over there, it makes one's heart rejoice," said Vasily, pointing to the field. "A fine spring, isn't it, Vasily?" "It's a spring such as the old men don't remember. I've been home, and my old father also has sown 3 measures of wheat. They say it has caught up the rye." "And have you been sowing wheat long?" "Why, it was you who taught us to sow it. The year before last you gave me a bushel of seed yourself. We sowed a quarter of it and sold the rest." "Well, mind and rub the lumps," said Levin, going up to his horse, "and keep an eye on Mishka, and if the clover comes up well, you shall have 50 kopecks for each desiatina." "Thank you kindly. We're very grateful to you as it is." Levin mounted his horse and rode to the field where clover had been sown the year before, and to another which was deeply ploughed and ready for sowing the spring wheat. The clover was coming on splendidly. It was already reviving and steadily growing green among last year's wheat stubble. The horse sank into the ground up to its pasterns, and drew each foot out of the half-thawed earth with a smacking noise. It was quite impossible to ride over the deeply ploughed field. The earth bore only where there was still a little ice. In the thawed furrows the horse's legs sank in above its pasterns. The ploughed land was in excellent condition. It would be possible to harrow and sow it in a couple of days. Everything was beautiful and gay. Levin rode back by the way that led across the brook, hoping that the water would have gone down, and he did manage to ford the stream, scaring 2 ducks in so doing. There must be some snipe too, he thought, and just at the turning to his house he met the keeper, who confirmed his supposition. Levin rode on at a trot, so as to have dinner and get his gun ready for the evening.